Narcissistic abuse is not merely a collection of toxic behaviors. It is a deliberate campaign of psychological domination. At its core, it mirrors the same methods described in the CIA's Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual, which lays out a playbook for dismantling another human being's mental defenses through systematic coercion. That document was written for interrogators. It instructs them how to destabilize identity, induce dependency, and control perception without visible bruises. Survivors of narcissistic abuse describe identical patterns: gaslighting, isolation, alternating punishment with reward, identity erosion. All that leaves scars no less devastating simply because they're not written on the body. This wound is carried in the mind, and the injury is lasting. When survivors of narcissistic abuse recount their experiences, they speak of being confused into doubting their own memory, stripped of autonomy and cut off from their support systems, and kept in cycles of helplessness enforced by fear, guilt, or shame. These aren't random acts of cruelty, but calculated tactics of control. The Kubark Manual explains that the goal of psychological coercion is to dismantle resistance and enforce submission. Narcissistic abusers operate the same way. They gather secrets and they weaponize them. They manipulate perception until reality feels unstable, and they control access to love, resources, affirmation. They use punishment to crush resistance. What results is a condition of captivity every bit as real as bars or shackles, only harder to prove because the damage resides in the victim's psyche. To frame this as psychological warfare is not exaggeration. It is precision. There's an identifiable sequence by which narcissistic abuse progresses, and it maps directly onto the operational logic of coercive control. First comes indoctrination, the grooming of the victim for capture. Next is a psychological breakdown where identity is stripped away. Psychological enslavement follows as dependency is created. Mental reprogramming then reshapes perception to conform to the abuser's narrative. Psychological punishment crushes resistance when it surfaces. Psychological submission enforces helplessness. Psychological captivity ensures long-term control. And then finally comes destruction and erasure, the ultimate betrayal where the victim's sense of self, history, and worth is obliterated. This is not chaos. It's a process. Survivors recognize these stages because they have lived them step by step until escape feels impossible. The cause of this warfare is profound. Research has shown that psychological abuse produces depression, anxiety, complex trauma, and post-traumatic stress systems that can endure for years. Survivors often use their careers, families, and communities as the abuse isolates them. Children raised in such environments suffer developmental harm that ripples across generations. The public health implications are staggering, and yet because the abuse leaves no obvious scars, it's minimalized or ignored. Our systems still prioritize physical evidence of harm, leaving countless victims unprotected. This neglect is not neutrality, it's complicity. This is why narcissistic psychological warfare must be named as what it is, a human rights crisis. International law condemns psychological torture when used by states, yet when the same strategies are deployed in private homes, workplaces, and communities, the silence is deafening. This double standard abandons victims to isolation and disbelief. Human dignity is not contingent on whether the abuser wears a uniform or sits across from you at a dinner table. The same harm demands the same recognition. To address this crisis, legal frameworks must expand to include coercive control and sustained psychological domination as actionable harms. Law enforcement and courts must be trained to identify the dynamics of mental dismantling. Trauma-informed services must be accessible and funded because healing from psychological captivity requires long-term care. Communities must be educated to recognize these tactics early so the silence and minimalization no longer protect perpetrators. And survivors must be centered, not doubted, not dismissed, but believed and supported as they rebuild their lives. Narcissistic abuse is psychological warfare. It's a systematic campaign that breaks the human spirit, enslaves the mind, and erases identity. That it continues in silence behind closed doors without urgent intervention, this is a moral failure. Recognizing it for what it is a first step towards justice. Survivors deserve not only safety, but validation, accountability for perpetrators, and a collective commitment to ensure that no one endures this war on the human soul unnoticed. If you want to learn more, you can check out my new book, Voiceless No More, The Legal War on Narcissistic Abuse, and it's available on Amazon now.